Hi guys, it's Ash from Envy. In today's video we're just going to go through a few steps for you to follow for your pond in the winter and a few maintenance tips as well. It's worth noting that pond jobs are just as important in the winter as what they are in the summer. Hopefully, following the tips that we're about to go through, you'll not have as many problems through the winter, and especially for spring next year and so on. So let's go and have a look at the pond. We'll get right into it. So the first step that we'll cover is actually feeding the fish. Now, we've got a separate video on our channel which is about everything fish related. That goes from looking after them, when to feed them, and just general fish health and maintenance tips. So after this video, if it's something of interest, then I'd recommend for you to go and have a look at it. But yeah, let's get into feeding the fish. So what we tend to suggest is when the temperature drops to about 10 degrees or below, at least start to slow the feeding down and eventually stop. Anything below 10, realistically, you don't want to be feeding the fish. There are some fish food that are out there that are designed more so for the colder periods. They might work or suggest to feed lower than the 10 degrees. A fish's metabolism and digestive system will begin to slow down a hell of a lot during the colder months. This is obviously due to the lack of movement that they do. The more you feed them, there's a higher chance that the food will just sit in their body and begin to rot, essentially. It can be quite fatal for the fish. So yeah, you definitely don't want to do that. So when you're feeding the fish, if you do start to notice that there's little to no interest from them, they're not coming up to the surface to feed anymore, or you come back out 5 or 10 minutes later and notice that there's floating fish food, lower the feeds, maybe go to 1 a day if you're doing 2, drop it out, let them get used to it, and then obviously that's when you can eventually stop because there'll be little to no interest from them for it. By using an excess amount, or if the fish aren't eating it, the food will begin to sink to the bottom of the pond where it sits on the sludge and adds to the nutrients that's in there. If you own a pond, you'll understand the importance of being able to monitor the sludge in there. You don't want an excess amount of it. This is what feeds things like blanketweed and algae. So by adding extra fish food, it does add to that. Anything below 4 or 5 degrees, stop completely. I'd say 10 degrees if you don't have a specific fish food that will work or is beneficial in the colder temperatures. Then yeah, 10 degrees or below, then you stop completely. So the next step that we'll cover is a pond net. We have a pond net over this pond throughout the whole year, and that's mainly just to stop herons from getting in there. But if you don't have a pond net, then you might want to consider doing this just for the winter. The biggest reason is if your pond is near an area that has loads of trees surrounding it, or at least nearby, and there's obviously a very high chance that in autumn, when the trees begin to lose its leaves, they'll become loose and can end up in the pond. If you're not fishing them out with a pond net, then you're running the risk that they'll begin to sink to the bottom of the pond, and that's when it adds to the sludge and it adds excess debris and nutrients into the water. So obviously by having a net over the pond, it will catch the leaves that go in there. You can easily remove them out of the pond before it breaks down. You know, you're helping try and prevent the problem for the next year, let's say. So just going back to herons, if you ever notice them in your area, for an example, if you have a lake nearby or just a large body of water, then you may notice them regularly. Like where we're based here in Chesterfield, we have a large park not too far away from here with a lake. Now, there's often times where we notice the heron flying over the pond, never bothers it. But there was one time where we never used to have a net on this pond. Because of that, the heron was flying over as normal and unfortunately took all of the fish out of the pond. So in the colder months, herons can get quite desperate for food. So if their usual food source they're struggling with, and they start looking for alternative places. So if your pond then doesn't have a net, it then becomes potentially prey for the heron because they're going to try and get anything they can do. That's just one of many reasons as to why a net is important, and it often gets overlooked. So it's yeah, certainly something to do if you're not already doing so. So the next step that we'll cover, and arguably the easiest out of all of them, is to just generally check fish, make sure there's no visible marks or signs on them, because when the temperature drops, obviously fish can react a lot different to it. So, and also doing like a water test. Doing a water test is arguably the most important thing that you need to do, and it's the same for winter as well. Any test strips are fine, but I mean, we have our own Envy Pond test strips. Using these once a week just lets you test all the 5 key parameters. That's the pH, KH, GH, nitrites and nitrates. When it gets to winter, the conditions in ponds do become a lot harsher. It's the thing that we have control of. We have no control over the temperature of the water or the weather that we have. We don't have control of that, but we have control of the water parameters. So anything we can do to make the water as healthy and as safe as possible for the fish, we're obviously going to want to do. So just going on from doing the water tests, we're actually going to move on to one of our own products now. It's designed specifically for winter, for the colder months of the year. And it's called winter pond treatment. And the idea behind it is it's a bacteria-based treatment that will keep the water healthy, it'll keep it clear, and it'll also target the sludge and the debris at the bottom of the pond, which builds up all year round. A lot of people try to tackle sludge through the summer, and rightly so, and it can be just as effective to do it then as it is now. But one of the benefits from doing this now is obviously the fish begin to slow down, so there's less waste being put into the pond, along with your limiting the amount of food that you put in, or some of you might not be feeding at all. The sludge will be limited, which means that if you're using a bacteria treatment such as winter pond treatment to help begin to break down that sludge and waste at the bottom, there's nothing being added to it, which means that it's a lot easier for the bacteria to be able to keep breaking that down without the replenishment going on top of it. Safe for all fish, wildlife, and everything that lives in the water, absolutely fine for them. There is going to be a link below where you can have a look at this on our website, and we provide a lot more information on there as well. So the next step that we'll cover is to try and prevent your pond from freezing over the winter. Now, this kind of goes without saying, but we felt it was necessary to cover for this video because it might get overlooked. Some people, if it does freeze over, might not really think about it being a problem, but obviously it is. The main cause for that is it will stop oxygen from going in and out of the water, essentially, which is very detrimental to a fish's health and can become quite fatal. So the second you see it frozen completely, you obviously want to try and break the ice. We're going to go through a couple of steps for you to follow which will help prevent that, so it shouldn't get to that in the first place. The first one is a pond heater. Now, we actually have a pond heater here. It's not currently plugged in yet, but we've just got it ready for the winter. So pretty self-explanatory, but it's going to heat the water, or at least the area of where the pond heater is. So if the fish do want some warmth, they're going to get it from there. The bottom of the pond does tend to be the warmest part, and they can survive happily by staying at the bottom, but a pond heater just ensures you're adding that extra bit of heat and warmth for them. So a more cost-effective way of being able to try and prevent the pond from freezing is actually with a tennis ball. These do freeze quite easy and aren't the most reliable, but for typically with the UK weather that we get, it should be okay. So if you just place one of these in the water, if the pond does freeze over, you can take this out and it should create a small hole in the ice, which is going to allow oxygen to get in and out of the pond. So it's always worth having them on hand, but we'd always opt for a pond heater as the first choice. So the last step that we'll go through is filters. Now, there's not a right or wrong answer for this. Again, this is one of them topics where you can read online, and a lot of people will say to leave them on. A lot of people will say to leave them off, so it's quite confusing. So both have positives and negatives at this time of the year. Moving water freezes at a lower temperature, so it's less likely to freeze the full surface of the pond by leaving this on. And obviously it also keeps the oxygen flowing. The disadvantage with leaving it on is that you're exposing the water to air, which creates a change in the water's temperature. So if you do have a waterfall or fountain or anything that might add or help with circulating the water, then it's beneficial to turn them off now at this point of the year. I would keep the filters running, but you want to try and turn them off because there's just not a need for them. So if possible, you want to try and lift your pump off the surface of the pond, mainly because this is where the majority of the warm water stays, which is why you always see the fish gathering at the bottom at this time of the year. But if you can lift the pump to about halfway to a third into the pond, then you're going to be taking the colder water and pumping that back through to the filter. Very beneficial to do that, so you're trying to not disturb any of the areas of where the warm water is. If you can try and move the pump closer to the filter outlet so it's not circulating the full pond properly, because that's going to help in terms of keeping some warmth in the pond as well for the fish. And one of the last things with this, and I think very important, we've kind of touched on it a little bit already in this video, is the pond heater. So if you're leaving the filter on and you have a pond heater, you obviously want to try and move this heater closer to where the water is going into the pond, because that's the coldest part of the pond. So you're going to be heating that area up, and if the water's circulating through that, then there's a higher chance that obviously the warmer water is going to pass through the pond. Again, very important if you're going to leave the filter on. If you want to turn the filters off, then it's important to know that you should do this about 2 weeks after you've stopped feeding the fish, purely because the pond just starts to slow down, which means the fish begin to slow down. There's obviously very little movement in them, and it refers back to a point that I mentioned earlier on in the video, where if they still have food in their digestive system, that food will struggle to break down, essentially. So yeah, typically that's the main reason why you don't want to feed them, or at least try and give it 2 weeks from feeding them to then turning the filters off. Clean the filters thoroughly and then drain them as well. You can leave them in the position they are if you didn't want to move them, even if they're turned off. But what we would recommend is just move them into a garage or a shed, anything you've got, where obviously they'll be kept out of like rain and potentially snow and whatnot. So that's it for this video. Hopefully you've spotted something in there that you didn't already know, or there's something in there that you'll find of use. All of these steps will certainly help you pond through the winter. So if you have any questions regarding any of these steps, or if there's anything else that we haven't covered that you want a bit of clarification on, feel free to get in touch. Our contact details are on screen now. You can contact us by phone, email, or we have a live chat on our website. Either one, absolutely fine. We're more than happy to help with any inquiry, whether it be big or small. Thank you for watching. Anything you can do with the channel in terms of liking this video or subscribing would be much appreciated. But yeah, thank you for watching. Take care. Bye.